my girlfriend said, "I need space to find myself." I said, "Take all you need." A week later she was healing at her ex's place. 2 months later, she unblocked me, just in time to see me holding hands in Paris. I should have known something was brewing when I walked into our Chicago apartment after the most exhausting week of client meetings I'd had all year. Madison was sitting on our couch with that expression I'd learned to recognize over our 3 years together, the one that meant a serious conversation was coming. I dropped my laptop bag by the door and grabbed a beer from the fridge, mentally preparing myself for whatever was about to unfold. "Ethan, we need to talk," she said, patting the cushion next to her with forced casualness. I sat down, studying her face as she gathered her thoughts with theatrical precision. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, and I realize I need space to find myself." The words came out rehearsed, like she'd practiced this speech in the mirror. "I feel lost, like I don't know who I really am outside of our relationship. I need time for personal growth, to discover my authentic self without the influence of being part of a couple." I took a long sip of my beer, processing what she just said. Madison had always been dramatic, but this felt different, more calculated. "Okay," I said simply. "If that's what you need, then take all the space you need." Her eyebrows flickered with surprise. I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes, probably wondering why I wasn't fighting harder or begging her to reconsider. Maybe she'd expected tears, desperate promises to change, or at least some kind of emotional breakdown that would validate whatever internal narrative she'd constructed about our relationship. Instead, I just nodded and finished my beer. "That's it?" she asked, her voice carrying a note of disappointment that confirmed my suspicion this was all theater. "You're not going to try to talk me out of it?" I looked at her directly, seeing clearly for the first time in months how much energy I'd been spending walking on eggshells around her moods and demands. "Madison, if you feel like you need to find yourself, then you should do that. I'm not going to hold you back from personal growth." The conversation continued for another hour, with her explaining how this was about self-discovery and had nothing to do with us as a couple, how she just needed time to explore who she was as an individual. I listened, nodded in appropriate places, and agreed that yes, personal growth was important. But something in her nervous energy, the way she kept checking her phone, and how quickly she wanted to make this separation official told me there was more to this story than spiritual awakening. Within 48 hours, Madison had transformed into a packing tornado, systematically dismantling 3 years of shared life with the efficiency of someone who'd been mentally preparing for this moment much longer than she'd admitted. I watched her fold clothes into boxes, each movement deliberate and final, while she maintained the narrative about needing immediate distance to begin her healing journey. "I think it's better if I move out completely," she announced while wrapping picture frames in newspaper. "Being here will just remind me of who I was in this relationship instead of who I'm meant to become." I helped her load boxes into her car without drama, carrying her books and kitchen appliances down 3 flights of stairs while she supervised with an air of someone orchestrating a necessary but difficult life change. She'd mentioned staying with her friend Jessica temporarily, though something about the way she said it felt rehearsed, like she was testing how the lie sounded out loud. "Jessica's place is perfect for what I need right now," she explained while avoiding eye contact. "Quiet, peaceful, good energy for reflection and meditation." I nodded and handed her the last box, containing the coffee maker we'd bought together last Christmas. The nervous energy I'd noticed during our breakup conversation had intensified, manifesting in constant phone checking and an eagerness to finalize every detail of her departure immediately. When she mentioned needing to leave right away because Jessica was expecting her, I noticed her hands trembling slightly as she fumbled with her car keys. "Are you sure you have everything?" I asked, genuinely wanting to make this transition as smooth as possible for both of us. "Yes, I think so," she replied, then paused by her car door like she was waiting for me to make some grand gesture or final plea. When I simply smiled and wished her well on her journey of self-discovery, I saw a flash of something that looked almost like disappointment cross her face. As she drove away, I stood in our apartment doorway watching her taillights disappear around the corner, and instead of the devastating heartbreak I'd expected to feel, I experienced something completely unexpected: relief. The constant tension I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying in my shoulders began to dissolve, and for the first time in months, I could breathe deeply without worrying about accidentally saying or doing something that would trigger one of Madison's mood shifts. I walked back into our apartment, my apartment now, and noticed how quiet it felt, but not in a lonely way. 1 week later, I was grabbing lunch with my friend Oliver when he accidentally shattered Madison's carefully constructed narrative about staying with Jessica and focusing on personal growth. "Dude, I saw Madison yesterday at that new rooftop place downtown," Oliver said between bites of his sandwich. "She was with Caleb, her ex from college. They looked pretty cozy for someone who's supposed to be on a spiritual journey." I set down my coffee, processing this information while Oliver continued, oblivious to the bomb he'd just dropped. "Actually, now that I think about it, I've seen them together a few times this week. Coffee shops, restaurants, always deep in conversation. I figured you knew." Oliver pulled out his phone and showed me a social media post from 2 days ago. Madison and Caleb at a trendy cafe, both laughing at something off camera, with Madison's caption reading, "Sometimes healing means reconnecting with authentic connections from your past." Another post from yesterday showed them at an art gallery, Madison gazing thoughtfully at a painting while Caleb stood close behind her, the caption reading, "Rediscovering who I really am through fresh perspectives and genuine conversations." I scrolled through more posts, each one a carefully curated piece of her healing journey narrative, but now with Caleb prominently featured as her spiritual guide and deep conversationalist. The timeline was damning. She'd been posting these photos of their meaningful connections and authentic moments during the exact same period she'd been texting me about needing solitude for self-reflection. "I had no idea," I told Oliver, though the revelation felt more like confirmation than betrayal. Madison's need for space hadn't been about finding herself at all. It had been a calculated exit strategy that allowed her to reconnect with Caleb without the messiness of a direct breakup or the social judgment that comes with immediately jumping to an ex. The nervous energy, the phone checking, the urgency to move out, it all made perfect sense now. She'd probably been planning this reunion for weeks, maybe months, just waiting for the right moment to execute her graceful transition. What struck me most wasn't anger or heartbreak, but clarity about patterns I'd been too close to see. Madison had always been strategic about her relationships, always keeping her options open, always positioning herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own choices. I realized I'd been walking on eggshells for months not because our relationship was going through a rough patch, but because she'd already mentally checked out and was managing my expectations while she orchestrated her next move. Instead of wallowing in Madison's deception, I decided to channel my energy into projects I'd neglected during our relationship, rediscovering passions that had been slowly eroded by her subtle disapproval and constant need for attention. I dusted off my camera equipment and spent my first weekend alone exploring Chicago's architecture, capturing the interplay of light and shadow on buildings I'd walked past 1,000 times without really seeing. The creative flow felt intoxicating after months of creative stagnation, and I remembered why architectural photography had once been more than just a hobby. It had been my way of seeing beauty in structure and purpose. Within days, I'd filled 3 memory cards with shots of the city's hidden geometric patterns and started a photography blog I'd been talking about for years but never had the time to pursue. Madison had always dismissed my photography as impractical, suggesting I focus on more profitable side hustles or spend weekends doing couple activities instead of wandering around with my camera like a tourist in my own city. Now I realized how much of myself I'd compressed to accommodate her vision of what our relationship should look like. I started researching a European photography expedition I'd dreamed about since college, bookmarking flights to Paris, Rome, and Barcelona for a month-long creative sabbatical that would have been impossible while navigating Madison's schedule and emotional demands. My sister Emma noticed the change immediately when she visited the following weekend. "You look different," she said, studying my face over coffee. "Lighter somehow. Less like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop." Emma had never particularly liked Madison, though she'd been diplomatic about it, but now she was openly encouraging me to pursue interests Madison had labeled as selfish or immature. "Remember how excited you used to get talking about photography?" Emma asked. "I hadn't seen that spark in you for months." It's like you're finally yourself again. I started working out regularly at the gym down the street, something I'd abandoned because Madison preferred couple activities that kept us together constantly. I updated my wardrobe with clothes that reflected my actual style rather than the more conservative look Madison had gradually influenced me toward. Most importantly, I reconnected with friends like Oliver and my college buddy Nathan, people Madison had subtly discouraged me from spending time with by creating scheduling conflicts or expressing disappointment whenever I chose their company over hers. The transformation wasn't dramatic or desperate, it was methodical and purposeful, like an architect redesigning a space that had been functioning poorly for too long. 2 months after Madison's departure, I stepped off the plane at Charles de Gaulle Airport with my camera gear and a month's worth of carefully planned photography locations, feeling more liberated and purposeful than I had in years. Paris hit me immediately, not just the visual beauty, but the sense of creative possibility that seemed to emanate from every cobblestone street and wrought iron balcony. I'd booked a small apartment in the 18th arrondissement, close enough to Montmartre to catch the morning light on Sacré-Cœur but far enough from tourist crowds to find authentic neighborhood moments. My first week was a blur of early morning shoots and late afternoon golden hour sessions, capturing the architectural details that had drawn me to Paris in the first place. The geometric patterns of Haussmann buildings, the way shadows fell across narrow alleyways, the contrast between medieval churches and modern glass structures. On my 8th day, I was editing photos at a café in Montmartre when someone approached my table speaking rapid French. I looked up to see a woman about my age with dark hair and intelligent eyes, gesturing toward my laptop screen where I had architectural shots displayed. "Excuses, ma, but those photographs are extraordinary," she said, switching to accented English when she noticed my confusion. "The way you've captured the light on Notre Dame's flying buttresses, it's exactly how I see them when I'm curating exhibitions." Her name was Isabel, and she was an art curator specializing in architectural photography at a contemporary gallery in the Marais district. We ended up talking for 3 hours about composition, storytelling through visual art, and the challenge of capturing spiritual essence in stone and steel. She understood my work in ways Madison never had, asking technical questions about my process and sharing insights about how architectural photography could convey emotional narratives beyond simple documentation. "You have to see the Sainte-Chapelle tomorrow morning," Isabel said as we walked through the narrow streets near her gallery. "The way light filters through those stained glass windows, it's like photographing pure music." Our connection felt effortless and intellectually stimulating, built on shared passions rather than the careful navigation of moods and expectations that had characterized my relationship with Madison. When Isabel invited me to dinner at a small bistro she knew, our conversation flowed from art to architecture to travel dreams, each topic revealing new layers of compatibility and mutual fascination. By the end of our first evening together, I realized I was experiencing something I'd forgotten existed: genuine romantic chemistry based on authentic connection rather than physical attraction and convenience. Meanwhile, back in Chicago, Madison's carefully orchestrated healing journey with Caleb was unraveling faster than she could spin new narratives about authentic connections and rediscovered love. According to Oliver, who'd become my unofficial intelligence source through mutual friends, Caleb had made it crystal clear within 3 weeks that he wasn't interested in anything resembling commitment or exclusive partnership. Apparently he told her he's not ready to be tied down again, Oliver reported during one of our regular check-ins. Same guy who broke her heart 5 years ago because he wanted to explore his options and focus on personal growth. Imagine that. Madison had expected their reunion to unfold like a romantic movie where lost love conquers all obstacles, but Caleb treated their reconnection as a casual arrangement between consenting adults who enjoyed each other's company without deeper implications. Her social media posts became increasingly desperate and philosophical, shifting from confident declarations about healing and authentic connections to vague quotes about learning to love yourself and recognizing toxic patterns in relationships. The woman who'd left me to find herself was apparently discovering that her authentic self wasn't particularly appealing to the man she'd risked everything to be with. Oliver mentioned that Madison had started obsessively checking my social media accounts, growing visibly frustrated by my apparent happiness and productivity without her anchoring presence. She keeps asking people if you're dating anyone, he told me during a video call while I was editing photos in my Paris apartment. Lisa said Madison seemed genuinely shocked that you weren't falling apart or trying to win her back. Like she expected you to be devastated and begging for another chance. The irony wasn't lost on me that Madison's journey to find herself had led her directly back to the same emotional patterns that had defined her college relationship with Caleb, hoping for commitment from someone who'd already shown her exactly who he was. She'd traded a stable relationship with someone who valued her for the uncertainty of chasing someone who'd already demonstrated his inability to prioritize her emotional needs. When mutual friends mentioned that Madison was asking detailed questions about my European trip and seemed especially interested in whether I was traveling alone, I realized she was beginning to understand the magnitude of her miscalculation and starting to craft some kind of plan to reconnect. 3 weeks into my Paris adventure, I woke up to dozens of notifications on my phone. Madison had unblocked me on every social media platform simultaneously and immediately dove into my recent posts like someone conducting emergency reconnaissance. The timing was perfect in the most ironic way possible, because she'd unblocked me just hours after I'd posted a series of photos from my evening with Isabel exploring the Latin Quarter. The images told a story Madison probably hadn't expected to find, me genuinely laughing at a sidewalk cafe, Isabel and I walking hand in hand along the Seine at sunset, the two of us examining architectural details on a Gothic church facade with the kind of intellectual intimacy that comes from shared passion. My captions were simple and authentic, nothing designed to make anyone jealous, just documentation of a life I was genuinely excited to be living. Discovering Paris through the eyes of someone who sees art in everything, accompanied a photo of Isabel pointing out sculptural details I'd missed. Sometimes the best travel experiences happen when you stop planning and start connecting, was paired with a candid shot of us sharing dessert at a small bistro. Within minutes of her social media investigation, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Madison had clearly gotten a new phone or was using a friend's device. "Hey Ethan, I know this is unexpected, but I've been thinking about us a lot lately. I miss what we had and I think I made a terrible mistake. Could we talk?" I stared at the message while sitting in my favorite Paris cafe, Isabel beside me editing her gallery notes for an upcoming exhibition. The contrast between Madison's desperate timing and my current contentment was almost comical. Here was the woman who'd needed space to find herself, reaching out the moment she discovered I'd found genuine happiness without her. I showed the message to Isabel, who raised an eyebrow with amused understanding. "The ex-girlfriend who needed to discover herself?" she asked with that direct French honesty I'd grown to appreciate. "Perfect timing, right after she sees you've moved on." I typed back a polite but distant response. "I hope you're well, Madison. I'm glad you're figuring things out. I'm actually in Europe right now for a photography project." Her reply came within seconds. "Europe? That sounds amazing. Are you traveling alone? I'd love to hear about it when you get back. Maybe we could meet for coffee and catch up properly." The desperation was palpable, even through text. This wasn't someone who'd found herself through spiritual growth. This was someone who'd realized she'd gambled away something valuable for something worthless. More messages followed over the next few days, each one more transparent than the last about her true motivations. She'd seen my happiness with Isabel and understood that I hadn't just moved on, I'd moved up to something better than what we'd had. The woman who'd made me feel like I wasn't enough had discovered that the man she'd deemed insufficient was actually capable of attracting someone who appreciated qualities she'd taken for granted. I never replied to her subsequent messages, but I didn't block her either. Let her see exactly what a relationship looked like when both people chose to be there, when someone's creativity was celebrated rather than tolerated, when authentic connection replaced careful management of expectations. Madison had taught me what I didn't want in a partner. Isabel was showing me everything I'd been missing.